Okay. So as this is a standard meeting, your video and audio are not disabled as they would be in a webinar. We encourage you to have your cameras on, but please ensure you are muted at all times to avoid disruption to the speakers. There'll be a Q&A section at the end where you'll have the opportunity to ask questions of the candidates. Please put your questions in the chat box and we'll do our best to get them all answered in the time that we have. Finally, please remain respectful of everyone in the room. We welcome healthy discussion and differences of opinion, but please express your opinions considerately and allow others the space to do the same. So, some background information on the Nature Friendly Farming Network. We are made up of a network of like-minded farmers working to secure a better future for farming. Through political advocacy, events, webinars, knowledge exchange and more, we aim to demonstrate that farming alongside nature rather than against it can bolster food security, farm businesses, the natural environment, public health and rural communities. With the general election approaching, the NFFN has organised this hustings to help you find out what your future MPs will do to support a vibrant farming sector in your community. So in this session, you will hear from Mark Lee, one of the NFFN's members and constituent of Penrith and Solway, on his own farming story. And then Mark Jenkinson, Markus Campbell-Savours and Julia Aglionby, the Conservative, Labour and Liberal Democrat candidates for Penrith and Solway respectively. And then you'll hear from each other during the Q&A section where you'll have the opportunity to ask the questions that matter to you. And so a final note from me before I hand over to Mark for his farm story. We have invited Penrith and Solway's Conservative, Labour and Liberal Democrat candidates to this hustings. We came to the decision to invite candidates from parties that received more than 10% of the national vote at the last general election. We are politically impartial as an organisation and the prospective parliamentary candidates present will represent a variety of views on the subject matter. Please feel free to email me should you wish to discuss this further. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Mark Lee, an NFFN farmer based in Cumbria, but I'm sure he can give you a more specific location than that. Mark will speak a little bit about his farm and what he'd like to see from Penrith and Solway's incoming MP. So I will hand over to Mark now and remove the spotlight on myself. And we spotlight Mark. There we go. Take it away.
Thank you, Mary. Hello, everybody, and evening. And thanks to all three of the candidates for agreeing to come and do this unusual hustings. I believe it's the first one the NFFN have hosted, although there'll be quite a few more in the next wee while going forward throughout the country. Mary's asked me to give a little bit of background about what we do on the farm. Jenny, my wife, and I farm at Park House in Trepenna. We're a 350-acre dairy farm. And our farming story has gone pretty much 180 in the last 10 years. So Jenny and I moved back to the farm about 10 years ago, and her father James and mum Marie were farming the farm for 30, 40 years before that. When we moved back to the farm 10 years ago, we moved into a situation where we had some big Holstein cows. We were pretty much fully housed, and we ended up taking the decision to milk them 3 times a day. So we were a high input, high output herd. And at the time, the milk market was fairly volatile. The milk price ranged from around about 30 pence a litre, and then in about 2015 it dropped down to about 14, 15 pence a litre for a lot of people, including us. At a cost of 28 pence a litre to produce the milk and getting 15 pence, we had to seriously reconsider how we were farming because the business wasn't viable that year. So we went and had a look at a lot of different farms around the country. Lots of good local farms in Cumbria, including James Robinson's, James Tweedy's, and several others, and decided that we would start farming as a spring block calving herd with mixed crossbred cows, which would allow us to farm with less inputs, which was the factor that was killing our business. The inputs for us were too high, and we wanted to cut those out. So we decided to farm as a spring block calving herd, which meant that our calving pattern matched and our lactation pattern matched the grass growth curve of our grass. And we've gone now through a sort of 8-year period of change, where we've realised various things had to change on our farm and for the way we wanted to farm. So 7 years ago, we became an organic farm. We're organic registered with OFNG. And we did that after seeing a field that we'd sprayed off and grazed. We realised that the areas that hadn't been sprayed, the cows were wanting to graze more than the areas that had been grazed. So that sent us down a route of looking at not using chemical fertilizers, pesticides and herbicides on our farm. So we became organic certified. And then about 2 years after that, we made the decision that we would only feed the cows pasture from the farm that we're on. So we became Cumbria's first 100% certified pasture-fed dairy herd. With the milk that we were producing, which is a high butterfat, protein and nutrient milk, we decided we'd want to add value to it. So we set up the Trepenna Farmhouse Dairy and we started making cheese on the farm. The farm cheese business now produces about 15 tons of cheese. And we employ 4 to 5 people, 4.5 people, making the cheese, selling the cheese, distributing it, selling it on local markets. We've won many sort of national and international awards in that way. And it's given us an insight into how important good nutrient-rich food is, and how important the local food network is. And that really connected us as a farm to local villages through lockdown, and getting the product that we make on farm out to local people. And those connections were really strong and have continued for the last 5 years. We were employing 2 people when we first moved back to the farm 10 years ago. Now there's 15 people employed on the farm. Not only do we make cheese and butter and yogurt, we bottle milk. We also set up Three Hills Gelato, which is a Cumbrian gelato business that we've set up in conjunction with Matthew Stockwell, who's from Keswick. And we're supplying lots of local outlets around Cumbria now. And finally, the next stage of our progression is to create an education facility, not only for schools, which we find is a really important part of how we're going to grow understanding about nature-friendly farming, but also farmer-to-farmer sessions, where we're working in conjunction with our processor First Milk into getting farmers onto the farm and showing them what we're doing, and also educating the public. So public onto farms on a soil to fork sort of experience, to educate them as to how food is produced, how it can be produced, and how important locally produced food is. So that's a short version of our story and what we get up to on the farm. Mary's asked very briefly, I think I've got about 2 minutes left to explain some of the issues that we think are important locally, and there's so many, so forgive me if I miss a lot of them out. One of the big issues, being on the Farmer Network Management Committee, is I hear a lot about the mental health issues that a lot of farmers are suffering at the moment, even more so than normal, due to the huge changes that have come in to the agricultural sort of policy making landscape. The rollout of the SFI, the lowering of the BPS, and the rollout of the ELM scheme. Although, new schemes and increased money welcome, just the slow and the sometimes badly communicated rollout of that is having a huge impact on the mental health of a lot of the farming community, which is really seriously sad. From our point of view, the closing of local abattoirs in the area, including Black Brown near Wigton, really limits the options of farmers that want to try and either diversify or get ahead of the large supermarkets and food processors who are setting very low prices by going direct to consumer. So the closing of the abattoirs is a big issue, and we would like to see something in place to sort that problem out. Educational access to farms. So there's a lot of schools wanting to come to farms, and there's a lot of farms wanting schools to come to them. But the cost of getting those children onto farms, especially in this part of the world where we're talking about big distances, the cost of those buses to get kids to school from maybe Workington to here or Maryport, Whitehaven is restrictive, and it's stopping schools and school children getting onto farm, which it can be life-changing for them in terms of their understanding of where food comes from and their inspiration to be involved in the agricultural institution. And coupled with that, the really sad closing of Newtonrig College a couple of years ago, and the lack of sort of further education, specifically in agriculture for our young people in such a large agricultural sector, part of the world, that it's a crying shame they have to leave Cumbria to get that further education. I'd just like to say, like the nature friendly farming, we've planted 75 acres of wooded pasture on the land. We've created wetlands. We've got 25 acres of ancient woodland, and we try and farm so that, first of all, we're food producers, and we produce the best quality food and as much as we can. But we like to think we're doing it in harmony and in partnership with nature and increasing biodiversity rather than reducing it. And the really positive thing about this is over 90% of the British public support farming in a nature-friendly way. And in this sort of political environment that we're in, I think we'll all agree that you never get a consensus like that across the spectrum. So Mary could probably correct me on whether it's 90%, 95%, but it's certainly right the way up there. So I'm really interested to hear from Mark, Markus, and Julia, and listen to their insight as to how we can move forward and what they're hopefully offering if they become our next MPs. So good luck and thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mark. That was really interesting. And thank you for highlighting those local issues. Hopefully our candidates can touch on those over the course of the hustings. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first candidate, Mark Jenkinson of the Conservative Party. So I'll be asking all of you this question that I hope you can answer. Mark, what will you do to support a vibrant nature-friendly farming sector in this constituency? And I will now spotlight you. Perfect. Take it away.
Thanks, Mary, and thanks, Mark, and thanks everyone for turning out on a Thursday night. I would normally be on a train right now, but I held back so I wasn't reliant on train Wi-Fi networks, which wouldn't be the most reliable. Mark's just raised a couple of issues which are really important locally and nationally. Mental health, which reminds us that we've always got to look out. Farming can be a very lonely business, and we've just reminded that we should all look out for those we come into contact with. Abattoirs, I think, shows the risk of over-regulation. But we're really careful when government does intervene, and I hope that we can rectify that problem in Cumbria fairly swiftly. And then Newtonrig, well, as a former Newtonrig student, I was very sad to see it go, and committed to bring them back. There are organisations who are trying to fill the gap that Newtonrig left, but not in entirety. And I'm committed to trying to bring that back to Cumbria so that others can have the same options that I had when I left school and wanted to go into farming. So yeah, I think I'd like to start by saying I'm under no illusions about the challenges involved in serving such a vast rural constituency. The reconfigured Penrith and Solway constituency is among the largest in England, but it hasn't stopped me travelling so far and wide already across the Penrith and Solway constituency, speaking to farmers and rural businesses about the issues that matter to them. And I'm able to talk from a perspective of what I've done and continue to do to help nature-friendly farming, both in Cumbria and across the country, rather than what I would do speculatively. I've got a track record of delivery behind me, and obviously want to continue that in the reconfigured constituency. And as the MP for Workington, I already represent huge swathes of what will become Penrith and Solway. I host regular meetings with members of the NFU. I've had them down in Westminster. I host them in North and West Cumbria. I've hosted round tables with farmers and the RPA, with the Red Tractor and farmers, with local farming cooperatives. I've had farming cooperatives down here in Westminster, and I regularly visit farms and auction marts across the patch. And I understand that no two farms are the same. The challenges that each of them face can be very, very different. So from my time as a hill farming student at Newton Rig to serving as the MP for Workington, I've always been dedicated to ensuring that local food production and farming are at the top of my agenda. And I come very much from that traditional, when I say come from, I wasn't born into it, but grew up and started work in a very traditional mixed farming, on a very traditional mixed farm that in a type of farming that we have lost across Cumbria in some instances, and are seeing a renewal in some of that. We call it regenerative farming now, but that very much that traditional mixed farming that Cumbria was used to. So when I came to Westminster, my first promotion was as a parliamentary private secretary to DEFRA, where I spent 9 months. And until I was most recently appointed as a government minister, I was vice chairman and formerly chairman of the Conservative Party's backbench DEFRA policy committee. So that's talking through the policies for the manifesto for the next parliament. And I was also a vice chairman of the all-party parliamentary group on upland farming. That's a cross-party group talking about upland farming issues. I have came across NFFN on, I think it was the DEFRA backbench policy committee. We had them in to speak to us. So, sorry. So I know this year has been particularly tough for farmers. And on top of that, we've seen a particularly wet lambing season, challenges for planting created by unusually high rainfall. And in the aftermath of the pandemic, we've also seen how vulnerable global supply chains can be. Yet too many people take the hard work of farmers for granted. They see milk, vegetables, meat neatly laid out on supermarket shelves and don't give a thought to how it got there. But you all know and understand the challenges involved in rearing, growing and transporting produce, but not everyone does, which is why we need to support British farmers by reminding the public where the food comes from. This government is backing British, clear, consistent labelling, providing consumers with the information that they need to do the same. It's no secret that British produce, Cumbrian produce in particular, is second to none, but we don't shout about it enough. And that's why we're ramping up promotion. Union Jack branding will appear more conspicuously on packaging, making British products stand out, make it much easier for customers to identify homegrown quality produce, confident in the knowledge that it's sustainably sourced here in the UK. And back in August, I was among signatories of an open letter calling on supermarkets to highlight the very best of British produce by implementing the Buy British button. And I'm pleased to say, as of this week, most of the major supermarkets are on board. Tesco came on board this week as the latest one to adopt, which is fantastic. So that will help our homegrown industry while we tackle the problem alongside of supermarkets holding producers to ransom as well. But Russia's invasion of Ukraine had a big impact on food imports, prices increases. it threw into even greater relief the importance of boosting food security and the overall resilience of our markets and supply chains. But we're already on a strong footing, fortunately. As a nation, we're largely self-sufficient in many products. Overall, we produce about 60% of all the food we need and 73% of that which we are able to grow. But we can go further to support farmers. And the government's food strategy, which farmers have helped to shape, commits to keeping it broadly that level in future, with regulations in the pipeline to make it a legal requirement to publish an annual food security index. But in terms of sustainability, we've got a lot of potential to increase it. And with this in mind, there's been significant investment across the food system, £270 million in the Farming Innovation Programme, £11 million to support new research to drive improvements to understand the relationship between food and health, allowing the UK to boost food production, ensuring that everyone's got access to healthy, affordable and sustainably priced food. And of course, as Mark touched on, the end of the basic payment scheme, the rollout of the environmental and land management schemes, policymakers and officials must never lose sight of the fact that food production has to go hand in hand with environmental protection, not at the expense of it. We can't ignore the fact that changes to farming methods in the last 40 years have resulted in significant loss of biodiversity and soil health, in some parts more than others. Less so in Cumbria, where we tend to farm more traditionally and with less arable, but that makes Cumbria incredibly important in the fight back. And balancing financial and environmental interests can be really difficult. That's why I welcome the news that the ELMS scheme payment rates have been updated to reflect current market conditions, including an increase in the average value of agreements across SFI and countryside stewardship, 50 new actions so farmers can be paid to improve soil health, provide nesting and foraging habitats for farmland and wildlife, which is so important to food production. And that ensures that farmers can benefit regardless of farm type or tenure. But it's not just take up, but delivery as well. Is entirely dependent on farmers having options available that work for them. And the SFI means that farmers are being paid for actions that support food production, can help improve farm productivity and resilience, while also protecting and improving the environment. From this summer, new applicants are able to apply for SFI and countryside stewardship mid-tier actions together through one application. So we're making it easier for farmers and land managers to see and understand what's available for them. They'll have access to the same actions, the same ambition, just with less paperwork. And I'll be pressing the government to continue to slash red tape, making things easier and more straightforward for farmers to continue their excellent work. And the CS, countryside stewardship, protects the environment by improving water quality, air quality, habitat, natural flood management, as well as increasing biodiversity and expanding woodland. And as of September 23, there are now over 33,000 stewardship agreements in place, to 94% increase since 2020. And then we have other grants for productivity and nature protection. Slurry infrastructure grant. Farmers can apply for grants between 25 and 250,000 to replace, expand, or build extra or cover slurry stores. I've supported a number of local farms in that endeavour to access those grants to unblock issues with Natural England, with the Environment Agency and the planning authorities, of course, to ensure that they can access those grants to enable them to store more slurry, or be able to access some of the productivity grants that will allow them to produce more without any barriers. And then we've got the water management grants, 10 million for farmers to manage their water use through better irrigation and more on-farm reservoirs. Certainly doesn't feel like we need much of that here in Cumbria at the minute, but we know that preparation for changing weather patterns will be key to ensuring productivity increases while still managing to enhance the environment and increase our biodiversity. The government set out how it proposes to drive innovation and productivity to increase domestic production, to spread jobs, to grow the economy, and farmers have a really important place in that. But it's got to be part of a dialogue with people who produce the food, you as the farmers. and farmers are going to remain at the heart of those discussions. And that's where, you know, the listening part that I do a lot of comes in. Feedback to DEFRA, feedback to the Secretary of State, to the Farming Minister, to the Water Minister, who we recently had on farms in Carlisle and in the current Workington constituency. And we've got to continue to allow rural communities to shape policy to ensure that we've got the right skills and enough labour to meet the challenges ahead. Farmers not only supply supermarkets, restaurants, cafes, are custodians of the countryside, conserving and enhancing the environment. And it's no small part to farmers that Cumbria is such a beautiful county. You're the backbone of my present constituency and of the constituents I hope to represent. You're fundamental to our national and local identity and to our economy, right down to the food on our plates. So the government has commitment to boost exports, which is helpful to British production, provided funding for free vets visits. We've fast-tracked SFI payments to help farmers deal with cash flow issues, particularly in years like this year. And at the Country Land and Business Association conference in November, the government announced support for farmer-led innovation and improvements to productivity, with several multi-million-pound contracts to drive crop innovation to enable us to continue farming in an environmentally sensitive and sustainable way. And it's by offering that support for farmers who in the main don't want to rely on grant funding going forward. They want a sustainable business. Every farmer I speak to does not want to rely on ongoing government support. They want to be able to farm sustainably and make a living out of the farm, the family to make a living out of the farm without having to turn their hand to government at every opportunity. But of course, to get there, we've got to support them with the grants to enable farmers to make it easy for them to adopt new practices so they can grow more, rear more, sell more, milk more, and have much more resilient businesses. And we committed £168 million last year in grant funding to support those aims. One thing I lobbied extensively for was to provide business advice, and we've provided advice to 17,000 farmers through the Farming Resilience Fund, and there'll be more grants to come this year. Farmers will also start to be paid for maintaining as well as creating habitats as well. We're extending permitted development rights to make it easier for farmers to adapt and diversify and develop their business. So to conclude, I'm fighting tirelessly for farmers and continue to take their concerns and suggestions from the fields of Cumbria to the halls of Westminster so that your voices are heard loud and clear by policymakers. I want you to have all the tools that you need for sustainable farming, and I just want to ensure you that I am listening, I am here, and if anyone wants to reach out afterwards, please do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. That was very, very insightful. Thank you. So we'll now hear from our second candidate, Markus Campbell-Savours of the Labour Party. So Markus, I ask you the same question. What will you do to support a vibrant, nature-friendly farming sector in this constituency?
Thank you, Mary. If it's all right, I'll just start by saying a little bit about who I am. I'm Markus Campbell-Savours, Labour's parliamentary candidate for Penrith and Solway. I'm Cumbrian by birth, but not by blood. My grandfather brought my family to Cumbria in the 1950s when he was working on the Calder Hall power station. I was brought up in Keswick, and after leaving school, did what many young people in Cumbria do: left the county looking for opportunities. I spent 15 years in London, where I trained as an electrician, and I've spent most of my career since 2003 working as a manager and on electrical projects. I have two children, and who I had when I was living down in London, and did that thing where you decide you don't want to bring up your children in the big smoke. So with my wife, who's also from Keswick, we moved back in 2017, and my kids are currently at school in Keswick. In 2019, I persuaded the good people of Keswick to elect me as their Allerdale Borough Councillor, where I served very briefly with Mark, actually. And in 2022, I was elected to represent them on the new Cumberland Council, where I currently hold the portfolio for governance and thriving communities. I met with representatives of the NFU recently who commented that it's customary for politicians who meet with farmers to talk up their links with farming. I'm sad to say I can't do that. There's no apprenticeship at Newton Rig on my CV, no time spent working on a farm, and certainly none of the expert knowledge on the issues that Julia has. Now what I do have, I think, is an ingrained respect for Cumbrian farmers. You can't really grow up in a place like Keswick without acknowledging their work and seeing how they've shaped the environment that we live in. But I'm not going to pretend to be an expert, not yet anyway. The question was, what will I do to support a vibrant, friendly, nature-friendly farming sector in this constituency? I think the first point I'll address is what kind of MP I'll be to do that. I've got no desire to chase a ministerial role. I believe the first job of an MP requires me to be fully engaged with my constituents. This is especially important in this new vast constituency. It covers such a large area and a diverse range of communities. It will be quite a task, as I'm sure my fellow the other candidates I'm sure are appreciating. On my campaign trail, I've already knocked on thousands of doors and picked up hundreds of issues. And if elected, I'll have to continue to engage residents face to face, not least our farmers. Post-Brexit, we're seeing some huge changes to how the government funds farming. And I believe the only way to support farmers is to ensure that the legislation meets their diverse needs. I can't do that if I don't sit down regularly with farmers and meet the unions and meet with groups like the Nature Friendly Farming Network. So what would Labour do? Labour have committed to a government procurement where 50% of our buying power would, including the NHS, would be put into locally sourced products, British products, and products certified to higher environmental standards. This is a bold target and one that will take time and effort to reach. Post-Brexit, we need to ensure there is not a race to the bottom on environmental and welfare standards. And it's only right that the government puts its money where its mouth is and puts some spend behind commitments to see us spend on quality and local products. Labour have also committed to setting up a flood resilience task force that can help us, help our farmers to deliver natural flood management schemes. This is especially important in communities like my own in Keswick and others in Cumbria that have seen the devastating effects of flooding. We are predicting peak flows to be 40% higher by 2070, and we will need farmers with their knowledge of land management given the appropriate incentives to help us avoid the devastation that these floods will bring if we don't act. We believe the current ELM scheme is far too complex. We know we need to simplify the bureaucracy and improve access to funding, but we know that one size doesn't fit all. As a candidate, I've already heard farmers describe how some farmers are finding it much easier to access support than their next door neighbours. And as an MP, I would meet farmers regularly to ensure that nobody's being unfairly missed out and that the grants, which are there to deliver public goods, are providing the correct incentives. Yes, payments need to be quicker. Food prices are too volatile to delay payments where farmers have invested to meet our objectives. A scheme designed for nature recovery fails if it reduces land availability, but only leads to more intense use of the remaining land. The government have failed to deliver their land use strategy, which was due in December. I think it's now due in the summer. Labour have committed to creating a land use framework that looks to ensure that the grants balance food production, nature recovery, flood resilience, and the other public goods that we want to see farmers help us deliver. We're keen to see the agricultural supply chain adjudicator work. It's taken a very long time. The agricultural bill, I believe, went through 4 years ago. We need to move much quicker. I spoke to a dairy farmer recently who described the issues they faced during COVID, where milk prices were scandalously low. But we also need to ensure that the adjudicator works not only for large sellers, but also for small farmers. It needs to cover a wider range of farm products as well. That's a little bit of a glimpse as to kind of what I believe Labour have as their priorities around these issues. But I think on a very local level, a big issue that's followed me for many years and has been one of the main activities that I've campaigned on is around housing. I think we've all seen many of our communities locally hollowed out by the issues with second homes and holiday lets. I appreciate with holiday letting, it's allowed some of our farmers to diversify what they're doing, which has been good. But I think we all would all agree that we've maybe seen it go too far. You know, villages like Guardhouse between Keswick and Penrith, where, you know, a few years ago, the family that were the last ones to move out of the village contacted us to tell us that they felt like they were turning off the lights. We need to see some real action on those issues, but we also need to see us building. We need to see us building affordable homes, real affordable homes. What we don't see is some of the bigger property developers taking much interest in our rural villages. The reality is we need smaller organisations. An example would be Keswick Community Housing Trust, who have done a fantastic job of looking for those small wins, finding those small sites where we can develop, 3 houses here, 4 houses there, 6 houses there. You know, this is what we need if we're going to meet the need where it's required, and avoid a situation where we see more of our villages just turned into dormitories that are busy in the summer and dead in the winter. I absolutely echo the concerns about transport locally, and I think there's some real work there for the Labour Party to ensure that we get some powers devolved to us that would allow us to run our own bus services, and hopefully some extra money there too. But I don't think I'm qualified to sign off on that just yet. So yeah, that's where I believe many of our priorities lie, and I hope that's been informative. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Markus. And now we'll move on to our third and final candidate, Julia Aglionby of the Liberal Democrats. And so for the final time, I'll ask the question, Julia, what will you do to support a vibrant, nature-friendly farming sector in this constituency?
Thank you very much, Mary, and I hope everybody can see that. If that's
I can see it, but it's not on. There you go. Sorted it.
Brilliant. Excellent. Well, thank you very much, and it's a huge pleasure and privilege to be here with you this evening. And thanks to Mark for all his efforts organising this, and Mary, to you as well. So my name's Julia Aglionby. I'm standing for the Liberal Democrats, and I'm absolutely committed to supporting nature-friendly farming. This is sort of my life. This is what I've been doing for the last 35 years in Cumbria, and here's some evidence from the press of the work I've been doing in this area. So whether it's recently in The Guardian exposing the failure of the government under their post-Brexit farming schemes, whether it's in the Financial Times showing that the uplands aren't getting a fair deal in terms of payments for biodiversity and carbon, whether it's showing that there are a lot of people who are saying that sort of rewilding is the answer to the nature crisis. I would say it's not farming for food that's the problem, it's the failure of the government to support farmers to deliver high nature value farming systems. And as others have already alluded to, it's the infrastructure around that. So recently, as quoted in the Farmers Guardian, the connectivity that farmers require in terms of having good data and good internet. We're really suffering here in Cumbria because we don't have good connectivity. 3G's been switched off. We don't have adequate 4G. You can't connect with the apps you need to in order to run your business. I know this isn't exclusive to farming, but it's absolutely essential in terms of using, making your businesses thrive. And as we look at training, yes, it is absolutely awful that Newton Rig closed, and it's a huge shame that this government wasn't able to save that asset of the agricultural college of that land. Effectively, it was transferred for £1 to a college that was out of the county, that was then able to sell off all that land and is now owned by two individual businesses. But the good news is that I've been very involved in setting up a new land and nature skills service. This is just launched. We've got our first 2 members of staff already there. They're being based at University of Cumbria. And this is a homegrown service for Cumbria, and bringing together all the opportunities in farming, in forestry, in conservation, making sure that we can really drive a green economy where farmers are given a future to provide food, to provide nature, and to provide access and look after our immensely important cultural landscapes. If we look at Penrith and Solway, it's an absolutely fantastic constituency, and it would be my enormous privilege and pleasure to represent this. But what's fascinating is that when you look at the sort of stats, that 47% of Penrith and Solway is either designated as national park, which is the green area, or as national landscapes. They used to be called AONBs, the blue areas. So our protected landscapes and ensuring that we can farm in a way that produces food and looks after the environment is really critical. And I see these as an opportunity, not as a hindrance, being in a protected area. 19% of the constituency is designated for nature in terms of being sites of special scientific interest. 11% of the constituency is common land, and common land's a really special place in terms of our cultural heritage. It's culturally rich, it's nature rich, and it does have specific requirements in terms of future ELM schemes. It's really important that we have the right form of governance in terms of our future schemes. There are over 1,200 farms within the constituency, and support those farms are at the heart of our economy. If they flourish, the constituency will flourish because they spend their money locally. If our environment flourishes, we all thrive. So what's really important for people to realise is that under this government, since Brexit, the government has failed both farming and nature. We have a huge range of issues facing the agricultural sector at the moment. By his own admission, the current Secretary of State, who is the 13th Secretary of State during this government, revealed that DEFRA had a £400 million underspent. They committed to spend, and that's just in England, they committed to spend 2.4 billion each year in England. They underspent by 200 million last year and the year before, because they haven't got a scheme that functions. They can't get the money out of the door. And this is linked to another thing around mental health. Why are there so many serious mental health concerns among young farmers as well as older farmers? The Yellow Boots, the campaign recently said that it's a huge issue, and that's because people can't see the future. They can't see viability for their businesses because they're not being properly supported. They've been effectively sent down a river, a rapids, without a paddle. They're in the canoe without a paddle, and it's potluck whether they're going to make it through or not. Another big issue for farms here is tenancies, and we have very high number of tenants, and it's really important that tenants are properly supported. At the moment, the way that the schemes have been set up, it is more profitable for landowners to keep land in hand, to terminate tenancy agreements, keep it in hand, and to effectively rewild their farms. And this is not good for our communities. It's not good for our economies. And it is nature that's suffering as well. We know from, here's an article from the Telegraph, that species have declined by 19% wildlife across the UK since the 1970s, and 40% of bird species are threatened with extinction. So the question is what would the Liberal Democrats do? Well, we are the party of farmers now. We are well regarded in that area. We've got a fantastic advocate in Tim Farron, who's in the next door constituency. So for me, at the heart of this is making sure farming pays. And if you can see these graphs, you will be able to see we have farm business income just released by DEFRA. This is for upland farms. And what's really important to take account of is when DEFRA reduces their figures, they haven't taken account of family labour. If we take account of unpaid family labour, manual labour, what we find is that farms are making a loss. We need to have a fair system that properly rewards farmers, and that's what the Liberal Democrats are committed to. We are the only party to have published a farming and food policy statement, which has been adopted by the party. We need all UK citizens deserve access to healthy diets. And the Liberal Democrats are committed to a sustainable land standard, supporting climate-friendly farming, supporting nature-friendly farming. Everybody needs to play their part and have a properly rewarded for that. And then fair supply chains are absolutely essential. We know that if you look at a loaf of bread, which costs on average £1.14, that only 9 pence of that goes to the farmer, and of that 9 pence, only 1 pence is profit. Farmers are not getting a good deal. We must ensure there's going to be a fair deal going forward. And some more specific measures. Tim Farron, some of you may have heard at the NFU conference recently, setting out our plan. So our plan is we have promised an extra £1 billion a year for ELM schemes in England. So that's going up from 2.4 to 3.4 billion. It's still a small proportion of the overall expenditure. We believe that, you may remember, under the EU, we had 7-year plans so they crossed over governments. So we're not in this sort of 5-year cycle. We think we should have 10-year investment plans. Farmers know where they are, there's stability, they can plan. You know, if we at home, I'm a trustee of a care farm and I'm involved in feeding our stock. We had a heifer born this week. If we keep her to calve at home, she won't be giving birth for another 3 years. It's really important that farmers can plan for their future. We also need to make sure that we reject all trade agreements that allow for imports of lower standard produce than we expect our farmers to produce here. And we need better alignment of our alignment with the EU. We have a market there of over 500 million people on our doorstep, and it's really important that our farmers can trade effectively with the European Union. Close to my heart is prioritising payments for those who work the land rather than those who own the land. Absolutely critical that whether they're tenants or commoners, payments are prioritised to those people who are actually working to deliver the outcomes that society is looking for. And surrounding as a wrapper of all of this is that we must fully fund advice and training for farmers. We know it is short-sighted, and in order not, if we don't do this. Before the Second World War, Britain only produced 28% of its food. We realised in the Second World War what a huge strain that was on a nation. Food security is part of national security. After the Second World War, we produced a lot more food by investing in farmers and making sure that farmers had the proper advice. Someone sitting in their kitchen table, walking around their farm with them and finding a solution for optimizing outcomes from their farm with them, and not simply via a computer screen. The rural payments, we need a smooth running, slick application scheme, but actually it is what decisions should I make? It's not just a drop-down menu. You're not just choosing what sort of add-ons you want on your computer. This is about farming the land, and we need to make sure farmers are properly supported to do that. So that gives you a flavour for what the Liberal Democrats would be doing. I personally, I think as many you will know, I'm personally completely committed to a rural constituency. The reason I decided to stand for Parliament is because I have seen through my work in Whitehall and the Board of Natural England, and then later on trying to deliver policy change, that it's critical that farmers are represented by a local champion who can make, and society as a whole across Penrith and Solway represented by a local champion who cares about this constituency, can act as a bridge between rural communities and Westminster. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Julia. And thank you to all our contributors. That's given us all a lot to think about, I think. So now it's time to move into a panel discussion, which we have about 25 minutes for, where we'll explore the issues you've raised in more detail. So what I will do is I'll hand over to Mark Lee, the farmer, and I will try and pin everyone now so we can have a view of all our candidates. So yes, Mark, I'll hand over to you for your questions. And if I could just remind everyone, because we want to hear from all the candidates again, if you could keep your answers relatively brief, that would be fantastic, because we've got quite a few questions to get through. So while I pin, I will hand over to Mark.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks, everybody. They were really good presentations and really insightful. There's a couple of questions that were fired to us before the meeting, so I'll just ask a couple of these questions, and you've all pretty much touched generally on this issue, as it's quite an important issue, but food security looks like it's going to be an electoral issue nationwide. We found food security to be a key concern during COVID, when we were distributing our cheese to local villages and taking it to people's houses. Shop shelves were empty. What does real food security look like to you? And I'll pass on. We'll go in order, shall we, Mary, to Mark first. What does real food security look like to you?
Well, it looks like growing as much as we are able to grow here in the UK, generally. But of course, there's a lot that we can't grow here in the UK, and that's where having trade deals with very few barriers across the world are really important to allowing the stuff that we can't grow to come in. And that, when we hear people slating trade deals without having knowledge of them, while trade deals that protect British farmers, I think it's that really we risk damaging the whole picture really for farmers across the UK. With this scaremongering environment, I mean, if anybody wasn't despondent at the start of tonight's hustings, then it certainly will be now. This scaremongering, doommongering outlook that people have, I think, is really, really damaging, not just to farming, but right across the UK. But food security means giving farmers the ability, the wherewithal to grow the foods that we can grow here in the UK without being reliant on government subsidies at every turn. As I said earlier, being able to, so interesting to hear Markus talking about Labour's commitment to 50% British public procurement, because that is a Conservative commitment. It's already been consulted on. It's in train. That's something we've been talking about since the last manifesto. It's been through all the policy creation since then. It's been consulted on, and that is in the sausage machine waiting to come out of the other end. But it's about allowing so farmers being part of shaping new schemes, grant schemes. Now we've left the European Union, and there are some that would drag us back in, give huge subsidy to big landowners. That does nothing for food security, quite the opposite, in fact. But the schemes that we've got now are developed to allow farmers to produce food sustainably in environmentally sensitive ways, putting health and vitality back into the land that we have stripped out over the last 3 or 4 decades in many places. There's no doubt about it. But them being at the horses for courses, them choosing what they want to do, what works on their farm, like you have, Mark, at Trepenna there. It's taken you, took you a few years to learn what your land could and couldn't do, and it's just about holding farmers' hands to some extent as they go through that transition to enable them to come out the other side, being able to farm and make a profit and know that their families have a future on the farm. and that the British public know what is produced here in the UK, that they see that Union Jack and can be comfortable knowing it's sourced and processed here in the UK. And that's a long-term transition that we need through education. You touched on education earlier on, through education into a whole generation or 2 generations that haven't really had that to think about. I think that's where we need to go back. Being able to go, and I've used your shed a few times. I use various vending machines at various farms and all sorts. Being able to go there and get food that couldn't be more locally produced is, I think, really, really important to teaching people, making people understand where the food comes from, how it's produced, and just making them think a little bit more every time they go to the supermarket. And Julia touched on the Lib Dems food and farming strategy, which would add 24 pence a litre to those milkshake machines. It would kill your gelato business overnight because of the introduction of HFSS levies. I think we've just got to be really careful. I said before, on abattoirs, I started by talking about the concern about over-regulation. We've got to be really concerned when government steps foot into people's daily lives. I think it was Ronald Reagan that said the most terrifying 9 words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." And I think most farmers would agree with that. So I think just giving farmers the tools that they need to be able to produce food sustainably in an environmentally sensitive manner, I think is the best route to UK food security.
Thanks, Mark. I'd like to ask the same question to Markus, if possible.
Thanks, Mark.
What does genuine food security look like to you?
It's a big question, Mark. There's a lot of ways to answer that. I mean, it's so many things, and in Cumbria we have the British Cattle Movement Service, delivered by developed by a Cumbrian MP, delivered by a Labour government, and showed its true value during foot and mouth when it became, not just a load of jobs for us in Cumbria, which if the civil servants had had their way would have ended up in Reading, also something which helped us deal with that crisis. But I think it's hard not to answer that question without talking about what's going on internationally at the moment and what that's doing to prices. And it feels strange for me. I'm 43 now. It felt like the world was becoming forever more interconnected, and we had this long period of peace in Europe. We had a slight wobble in the 90s with what happened in former Yugoslavia and Kosovo. But actually, it felt like we were entering this period of great prosperity. And under those circumstances, we made a lot of decisions about, who we would trade with and who we would rely on getting our things from, without necessarily knowing that we were going to end up in a completely different position. And I think now I think food security is as much about the decisions our government make on those big international geopolitical issues, the wars that we're seeing overseas, and how we de-escalate them and how we get people trading again. Because as supportive as I am of us being as resilient as possible, as supportive as I am of us seeing us produce as much as we can, the reality is that the consumer's tastes are broad, and there are some products that we need to get from overseas. And yeah, I think that has to be the priority in this question, as well as supporting our farmers to be profitable and to be able to produce as broad a range as good as possible.
Thanks, Markus. That was great. I'll pass on to Julia next. Julia, what does genuine food security look like to you?
Well, thank you. Genuine food security is that every person can afford to eat a nutritious diet. And that's absolutely critical. At the moment, we know that public health is declining, and we know that it is that good food costs twice as much as high calorie processed food. So it's really important. It's about individual families across the UK being able to afford nutritious food. And at the moment, and that's food that's produced sustainably, and food that that they will then be healthier as a result of that. And we can't talk about farming without talking about food and about society. And that's why our food and farming policy bring those together. It's about having free school lunches for all children in primary school. It's having free school, extending free school meals in secondary school as well. It's about making sure that British farmers can afford to produce food. At the moment, the reason why we're having declining levels of a lot of food supplies is because it's not affordable. We have issues around immigration, so we need a fair immigration system. It's really important we produce more fruit and veg in the UK, and that's really hard when we can't bring in seasonal workers in order to pick those and harvest that. It's ensuring that we have a rebalance the power and the control of the supply chain. It's making sure that when we sign up for trade deals such as CTTP, that we're ensuring we're not selling our farmers down. If you're an egg producer, there are many egg producers across Penrith and Solway.
Thanks.
But if we can bring in, if we're having issues with say cheap eggs from Mexico coming in, we have banned cage systems here, but we're perfectly happy to import eggs from caged birds from overseas. It's really important that there's a level playing field. So for me, ensuring we have food security is supporting our farmers here to produce food. It's making sure with the land use framework that's been referred to already that we ensure we have a plan. At the moment, we have a laissez-faire policy, and it's been shown just in the last week that the government had to change their views on the rules around wild bird mix, because what we found was that some farms were putting the whole of their farm into a particular option, which paid enormous sums per hectare. And this is where land could be used for growing arable crops, but instead we have perverse incentives created by the existing systems. We've already seen in the chat the issue around the balance, whether there are incentives for landowners to take food out of production for food, and instead of having a balanced system of food and nature and climate resilience, we're swinging a pendulum in a particular direction. So that's what food security is for me, Mark.
Thanks, Julia. That's great. I've got one or two more questions, and then I'll hand back to Mary, who's going to field some questions that have come up relevant to what you guys have just spoken about. Sorry. The next question is to do with higher tier land management schemes. Our chair recently lobbied the government to increase the number that are available, and it was a successful lobbying campaign. Higher tier land management schemes are the most ambitious in their sort of environmental impact and represent an important source of income to many farmers in the constituency. What will you do in your role as the MP to protect and increase access to these environmental land management schemes for more farmers? Because that's where the real incentives are. So I'll go to Mark again, although Mark's getting these questions first, so I understand that he's having to think on his feet whilst everybody else gets a bit of a chance to think about them. So I'll just say it again. What will you do to protect and increase access to the higher tier land management schemes, which are important to farmers in this constituency if they can get access to it?
Thanks, Mark. So yeah, I just said in the answer to the last question about horses for course, about farmers being able to do what's right for their farms. I think, if I'm not mistaken, your silver pasture was HLS at Trepenna there. Having the options available for farmers to be able to pick and choose what they want to do, which is why the flexibilities in SFI are obviously really important for those that are just coming into these sort of schemes. I think that's the most important thing. Now, I had Robbie Moore, who isn't the farmer minister but is a DEFRA minister, up a couple of weeks ago on farms, and he was lobbied then by farmers to who had signed extensions, I think, to HLS, and then were unable to access some of the actions in SFI because the land parcels were already in HLS. So, you know, that sort of lobby, you lobbied me and Trudy on getting access to the scheme that you wanted to do, and I believe we managed to find a way through. And Trudy was minister, and having that ability to go to ministers, have them in some cases come directly to farmers and see for themselves what is holding farmers back from taking up new schemes, I think is the most important. So I think where people want to be really ambitious, where they want to commit for the longer term as much of HLS does, then I think we should be making it as easy as possible for them, giving farmers the option so that they can do what's right for their farm. You know, we've seen what's happened in Wales with the suggestion of mandatory tree planting. You know, Keir Starmer says that's his blueprint for government, is we've got to look to Wales. Well, I certainly don't want, you know, 10% of every farm handed over to woodland creation and another further 10% to other schemes, you know, mandatorily. I think it's got to be farmer led, and it's up to government to give them the option. So the best thing we can do is to listen, make sure ministers are listening, and one of the benefits of post EU exit farming funding schemes is the fact that we can be as flexible as we like, as quick as the civil service will move anyway. But we can be as flexible as we like. We're not being ruled by committee or even commission in a lot of cases over in Brussels. So it allows us to listen and alter things as we go. We've seen rates increase. We've seen when people were taking too much into herbal leaves or birdseed or whatever, that we were able to put limits on certain types of farms and the amount of land that they could put in them. That all happened very, very quickly, as we could see, you know, the unintended consequences of policy, and that will continue to happen. The schemes are designed to be flexible, but I think for me, the biggest thing I can do is to listen, make sure ministers are listening, and try and get those things unblocked, and that the offer is as large as possible for farmers.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, the tree planting that we did wasn't under the HLS. We were trying through yourselves to get the HLS, but we did manage to get some access to Trudy, and it was actually through RAISE, which is the Cumbria Community Forest, which is all part of the same funding. And it, you know, that flexibility there was important, and it's not understood or open to everybody at the moment, which is part of what we're trying to ask in these questions. But yeah, no, I appreciate your answer. Thank you. I'll go to Markus next. What will you do to protect and increase access to the higher tier land management schemes within the constituency?
I felt a bit sorry for Mark having to go first a second time, and then I thought, actually, some of the things he's saying is exactly what I'm going to say. I mean, I think it's about the role of an MP. It's about the role of an MP in terms of making that case and taking those specifics to the government and showing what works and doesn't work. You know, we've seen it across all sorts of things we do. And as a councillor, you know, we have cases where people are trying to access grant money for all sorts of things where they just don't seem to be able to tick those boxes. But I think the thing I would add is there's a support network to be had. And that might be, you know, West Cumbria's Rivers Trust working with farmers and as ensuring that we've got a real support network, a gap analysis of it to ensure that we're covering all those bases. Because I know from speaking with organisations like the Rivers Trust, the key role they played in persuading some farmers to try something new and try something different. And often it just takes the one, doesn't it, before other farmers in the local area will become persuaded that actually maybe that's not a bad idea after all, and maybe that's something that I could do. So yeah, it's proactive politicians and a good support network.
Thanks, Markus. Like to pass on to Julia again. Do you need the question again, Julia? Or are you quite happy?
So I think,
with
yeah,
what we're on? Yeah.
Well, what's fascinating is that, you know, the higher tier schemes aren't actually open, and we're not expecting them to be open probably until the autumn. We might have the SFI in the summer, but at the moment we will have over a year with no access to higher tier schemes. So this is a massive missed opportunity. We are coming up to 8 years after the decision to leave the European Union, and things have gone backwards, not forwards. It's a massive missed opportunity by this government. So the first thing, what I would do as the MP for Penrith and Solway, is hold the government to account, to making sure that whoever's at government power, and I would acknowledge it's unlikely to be a Liberal Democrat government, but my absolute key role would be to hold them to account. If you look at the number of times that Tim Farron has spoken on matters of farming around stewardship schemes, they're numerous. I believe, Mark, I'm not sure that you've spoken on farming in Parliament. I can't find any record on Hansard of any questions where you have asked the ministers in order to, raise these issues. I think it's absolutely critical. As a local MP, one is seen to be standing up for one's constituencies. So there's the work done there. It's also important, obviously, to be working locally, to be listening. And we're in higher tier scheme at home, so I know all about the higher tier scheme. What's fascinating is that the government has been a bit disingenuous when they put in things like they can increase the rate for a particular option GS6. That can go up to over £600 a hectare, but actually you can only get into this if your land appears on a particular map. And if you go between Penrith and Keswick and look at the land that's available there, there's very little land that's actually can go into these schemes. So it's really important that there's a fair deal for farmers, that higher tier is available. And also we have, as I've pointed out on my map, 19% of the constituency of sites of special scientific interest. What we're finding is that the natural England, you have a sort of postcode lottery depending on your officer. And it's really important that we have a fair system, that whether you're on a common or on your own farm, that there's consistency of approach, and that we look at opportunities for delivering for nature, which aren't limited to the features of interest of a SSSI that may have been designated 20, 30, 40 years ago. And so making my role would be to work with bodies such as Natural England, having the conversations, making sure that government is providing schemes that function adequately, and making sure that that schemes are actually open. And I think this is the failure of this government, is that they haven't been able to sort out a higher tier scheme. So as you said, Mark, yourself, you weren't able to include, that under, you were great that Raise was available, but those schemes aren't available for everybody. We find that those people who are perhaps more articulate and more educated are able to access these special schemes. And if you're a farmer who's been farming your land for a long period of time, you may have left school at 15, 16, 17. You may not have the digital literacy in order to access these schemes, and you just don't know where to go. So enabling good information is available. That's why I'm so committed to the Land and Nature Skills Service, because I think we need to ensure existing businesses have the appropriate skills to go forward. So for me, it'd be developing skills, peer-to-peer learning, sharing information, and making sure that government is held to account.
Thanks, Julia. That's really there are quite a few questions coming in to be asked, and I know Mary has a few that have been posted, and I don't want to take up too much more time from Mary to ask you a few more questions, but I really appreciate your sort of answers and your time that you've taken to answer those two questions. I'll pass on to Mary now, And like I just mentioned, if anybody's got any more things you want to put on the chat, then it is being recorded, so people can see your questions and your views, even if they're not going to be asked directly tonight. So I'll pass on to Mary now, and hopefully you've heard enough from me. So thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Yes, I was quite ambitious in the amount of questions I had written down. So we won't get them all answered tonight, but I'm sure the inboxes of the candidates are open for your questions in future. So I'm just going to pick one from the list that I think it's been touched on already, and I think probably rounds this up quite nicely. So young people are key to a sustainable future. How will you encourage and support them to remain in rural communities and follow appropriate career paths? That was a question from the audience from Eventbrite. So I will start the round in the same way I've started it before. Mark, you're okay to go first?
Yeah, thanks, Mary. First of all, I just want, first opportunity, I just want to respond to the personal attack from Julia there. I don't speak in Parliament. I'm a government minister. I'm a government minister in 3 departments, but I do sit with the farming minister 4 days of every single week. So I think, I mean, well, we'd all like to do a Tim and be in Parliament 2 days a week, say something, shout at the government, and then go off and make some promises that a Lib Dem candidate elsewhere is making opposite promises to. Then, you know, that would probably suit us all. But I actually sit with DEFRA ministers on a daily basis and discuss all of the issues raised with me by local farmers directly. Some of us don't go on word count in Hansard, but young people. So when I went to Newton Rig, 16 years old, I'm in the middle of this course. I lived on farm for a while, but it dawned on me that I'm surrounded by young farmers who all have family farms that they're going to be able to work on, inherit, and I wasn't going to be able to do that. That wasn't my family. Weren't landed, no money. You know, I'm the son of a single office clerk. My dad was is still a bin man in his 45th year there. So I wasn't going to be in the position that some of these guys were in. And that's why I left farming at the time. I think I still, as an adult, I've kept, you know, at every opportunity, I've had goats, I've had sheep, I've had chickens, ducks, at every opportunity where I've had to keep livestock. So I know that my heart is still back there. And I regret not being in a position, or not feeling like I was in a position that I could carry on with the thing that I really, really enjoyed. And I think there'll be many, many youngsters in a very similar position, either because they're in the same position as me and they're not in they haven't got a wealthy background to fall back on. I say wealthy, asset wealthy. I'm not sure there are many farmers that will consider themselves cash wealthy. They may have a number of siblings. They might be the youngest or whatever, and not able, you know, there isn't room on the farm like there used to be for all the siblings. There might be on a farm, you know, an upland farm, when they prefer to be on a lowland dairy farm or something like that. So I think for various reasons, people find themselves in this situation. I think the loss of Newton Rig was big. It was a mistake to remove the asset lock when it was transferred. Not that the asset lock would have protected it would have protected the land for some time, but it still remained to find an operator. I think the loss of Newton Rig to Cumbria is massive as a former student. I think the situation in recent years, the changes that we've seen, the price spikes that we've seen is enough put anybody off. So we need that to settle. We need not just young farmers on farms. We need engineers for all of the milking robots that we're putting in. And you know, my son, who is not a farmer's son, wants to be an engineer. Is he going to end up on farms fixing milking robots? Probably not. I think that would tend to be people who've had that background. So I think we've just got to, but everything we read, everything we see, and this happens not just in farming, but agriculture, everything we're faced with on a daily basis is how terrible the sector is. So why would you come into it? Because that's not what the parents are telling them. But when they read the media, when they turn on the news, when they listen to parliamentary candidates like those here in Penrith and Solway, all they're faced with is scaremongering, doom-mongering, everything's terrible. You know, we've got to, as leaders, we've got to sell farming as an option for the next generation, because too many want to leave, not just for the reasons that I set out before, but for the reasons I've just set out as well. So I think we've got to pick it up. We've got to give farming the respect as leaders that it needs. And I think that's a path that we're on in government.
Hello, Em.
With the current DEFRA team, and I think we've just got to build on that and make sure that farming is seen as something that existing farm youngsters want to go into, but also new ones as well. So the people like me, when I was 16, can think that I have a future in farming. I might end up as a tenant. You know, there's things to do there on implementing the ROC review, for example, some of the outcomes of the ROC review, being able to give security to those youngsters who want to move on to tenanted farms. I think all of that, there's a huge jigsaw, and it's just about getting all of those pieces together. That's not an overnight thing. We've spent 50, 60 years cramming farms with livestock, given blanket subsidy payments, and allowing ever larger corporations, not so much in Cumbria, thankfully, but ever larger corporations to become bigger and bigger landowners, buy up all that land. And I think we just need, we need farmers to think there's a future in it for their youngsters, and we need the youngsters to think that farming is something that they want to go into. That's where it starts, but there's a lot of other pieces of the jigsaw as well, I would say.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Mark. And now I'll put the same question to Markus about young people.
Apologies if I'm sounding like I'm scaremongering about what's going on, but it's sometimes when you go and speak to farmers, it's you often get those sort of stories handed to you on a plate. It was interesting the other day when I met a young farmer in Cumbria who's currently studying at Kendal College, who I believe picked up some of the students who were previously would have been doing similar courses at Newton Rig. And when I asked the question, you know, are you going into farming? You know, are you going to, you know, take over from your parents and what they do? And the answer I got was, well, I look at what they do and it looks really, really stressful. And actually, it kind of puts us off doing it. And I think that's, you know, that's a common story. That's nothing new. But I think clearly we need to make a better lot for our farmers if we want young people to do that. That would have been somebody that would have been in the other camp that Mark wasn't describing being in when he was at Newton Rig, who potentially has that additional opportunity, but is being put off by the stress and the horrors of part of the job that they see their parents having to do. And that's obviously a real shame. I think Newton Rig's closure, absolute disaster. I think for me, it flags up that sometimes what our training providers, view of what's the right thing to do doesn't always match with what we want to see. I remember when I did my electrical apprenticeship many moons ago, I had to go to London because I couldn't find anybody to train us in Cumbria, despite the fact that nobody could find an electrician. At the time, I couldn't find a company that was taking on any. I then go to London, and the college that I'm at, halfway through my course, decide that they're going to shut the college in order to extend the dance studio. And I couldn't quite work out why the dance studio was being extended when everywhere I went, everybody complained that there weren't enough electricians and they couldn't understand why that wasn't the priority. So I think there's there's a question about how our training providers operate. I think it's good news that University of Cumbria are stepping up to the plate. The original vision for University of Cumbria was a university that wasn't just offering generic courses like any other university. It was a specific offer designed to support the economy of Cumbria. So I think that's part of it. I like the idea of them being involved as well, because I think it presents career paths for people. I think the trouble is with some industries is that people don't necessarily know how far they can take it. Why start on a journey which appears at the offset to be so short? So I think that's really important. But I think there's a wider issue, and it's about Cumbria, because the story about people not being available to do the jobs that we want them to do is much broader than farming. It's the reason why we have a crisis in NHS dentistry. It's the reason why we have a crisis in the NHS as a whole in Cumbria. It's the reason why the council struggles to fill roles in building control and the planning department. The truth is we need people in Cumbria, and we are struggling to get them in. And I think there's a big question for us as politicians to ask about what is the offer of Cumbria more widely. You know, if you're going to come here and do a job, what's your spouse going to do when they move here? What are the job opportunities for them? What's the cultural offer? What are the schools like? It's a much, much broader issue. And if people, I came back with my family, and most of the people I was at school with who moved away didn't come back. And that will continue until we've looked at that bigger vision as to what is the offer of Cumbria. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you, Markus. We are at time now, but Julia, I would love to hear your answer to that question as well to round off the hustings. So yes, how will you encourage and support young people to remain in rural communities?
Well, I'm really positive about the future. I think there's a hugely positive future available for Cumbria, for the land-based sector, for the nature-based sector, for the food-based sector. So I'm really positive about it. What I'd like to see is a change of government, and a government that supports young people and existing businesses to be able to have the right skills in order to deliver what we need from our land. And as I said, I'm working with this developing the Land and Nature Skills Service. That's a collaborative venture. The partnership includes the Cumbria Chamber of Commerce, includes Cumberland Council, it includes the Westmoreland, it includes the Cumbria Wildlife Trust, includes the Farmer Network. So the key is, how do we work together? If we work together, we can create a bright future for Cumbria, for Penrith and Solway. There are masses of opportunities ahead. So I wouldn't be doing the work I do, I wouldn't be standing for Parliament if I didn't think there was a bright future for Cumbria. So it's not about scaremongering, it's about saying what has been wasted going past, but actually none of this is rocket science. If we have the right values, if we have the right commitment, and if we look forward with hope and we deliver on what we promised to deliver, then we will make sure that there are good opportunities. We will make sure that Cumbria thrives. We will make sure that wealth is more fairly distributed. And we will make sure that young people would like to stay in Cumbria and have opportunities. That also, as Markus has already said, people do often go away for a few years, but if they want to come back in their late 20s, as I came to Cumbria, having been away at university, I came to Cumbria, and got a full-time job here when I was 27. My husband wanted to live in Cumbria as well. His family were from here. We want to make sure that there are jobs available. So some people will be directly on farm. Some people will be like myself. I worked at Yorkshire Mart for 17 years. There'll be other people who will be serving farmers in a range of opportunities. We know that farmers spend money locally. If we have a thriving, vibrant farming sector, we will have a thriving, vibrant community and economy. So I would say, let's make sure that if we start from the age of 3 upwards, so the farm I'm a care farm trustee of, we have over 4,000 people a year on the farm. We make sure we cater for people for whom mainstream school doesn't work. We ensure that there are pathways for people to progress. Maybe they didn't get the GCSEs they wanted, maybe school didn't work for them, but then they can go on to apprenticeships. We have students who came to us who are school refusers. They ended up going back to do their GCSEs. Sometimes they take them on the farm, and then they've ended up at agricultural college and even going on to degrees within Cumbria. That's what we would like to see. My work every day is creating a brighter future for people within Cumbria, in order that we have sustainable food supplies, we have a sustainable nature, and we ensure our cultural heritage that's so very precious to us and the 40 million people who visit Cumbria each year. We make sure that it is a great place to work, a great place to visit, and a great place to bring up your family. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone for attending this evening. I hope it's been valuable for you. And thank you so much to our candidates for sharing their plans and ideas with us. And also thank you to our lovely farmer Mark for bringing this hustings to the table. So a final reminder that the session will be available to watch on our website and YouTube channel, and I'll stop